Thanks for tuning in to Talk It Out with Pratika Karkwal, a place to hear stories, experiences, and impact in the fields of mentoring and mental health. These two are important causes for today's youth. I'm your host, Pratika Karkwal, a current high schooler who is a passionate advocate for these causes and is here to provide you with a place to hear and learn from the inspiring experiences of our guests. We have here with us today Dr. Angela Glymph, CEO of Pure Health Exchange, or PHE, a nonprofit committed to increasing health equity for diverse youth so all youth can be equipped with tools and awareness to stay safe and healthy. Dr. Glymph also represents PHE across different platforms, like recently at the Axios event, where she got to spend time with leaders including U.S. Sergeant General Vivek Murthy, the CEO of AmeriCorps, politicians, and representatives from other top companies. Dr. Glymph, thank you so much for joining us today and for championing the cause of health equity because it truly matters. We're excited to dive deeper into health and well-being with you today. So,
Awesome. Thank
yeah,
you for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time. We're really excited. So, Dr. Glymph, here on this podcast, we're all about like sharing stories in order to really connect and relate with our listeners. So, do you have some personal experiences you're comfortable sharing which made you really passionate about leading this effort to increase health equity?
Yeah, I do. I'm going to share two stories. One is sort of an early experience that I had in my life that really sort of opened my eyes to challenges with health equity. And then I'll share a more recent experience that really sort of fueled and inspired me to continue and to double down on this work. So when I was about, I would say 19 years old, I think I was a second year student in college. I had the opportunity to do an internship in Baltimore City, actually. So I was attending University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I was working with the University of Maryland Medical Systems, and they had created a diabetes prevention study. My background is in psychology, and at that time I was exploring research and like trying to understand and get research experience in psychology. So this program was really good for that. But it obviously diabetes is a health issue specifically for folks of color. And individuals living in low income areas. And so Baltimore City was an ideal place, right, to really do this
Yeah.
work and to try to combat that illness. But it was also targeted for youth, actually. So these are young people, mostly Black, living in Baltimore City, already have very high BMI. So they were at risk for diabetes. And it was designed to basically give them the education on food, nutrition, even diabetes itself. Some of it, the psychological pieces around that was sort of like uh, addressing stigma around just diabetes in and of itself, and then connect them to resources, right, to better their health. And it was for the youth and their families. So for me, I was 19. I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, very suburban area. I lived in a well-resourced area. So it was eye-opening to know that there were other young people that just did not have the access to education, to basic needs like a grocery store, right? To medical resources that I was afforded in my childhood. So that was like the first eye-opening experience that everyone doesn't get what you get. Like everyone's experience in this country isn't the same. And working there, like I got a real education, not just on like diabetes and the causes of that and the risk factors, but things like food insecurity and food deserts, because many of these young people were living in Baltimore City, living in communities where there was no access to a grocery store. So even when the program, well intentioned, was providing nutrition education, and was given vouchers for them to go to the grocery store and, buy or make healthier food decisions, there was no grocery store for them to use them at. So things like that, or even like getting to our program, we would do a lot of afternoon programs with them and their families, but like they needed bus tokens because, they couldn't even physically getting to the hospital was a burden for them. So that was my first experience on just equity in general, but very specifically health equity. And so that really motivated me to continue my studies in psychology. And, I got a doctorate in most of the like projects that I did or internship opportunities that I did. And also knowing like once I get this degree, what kind of context I want to work in. That early experience motivated me to do work in health equity, educational equity, and whatever was at the intersection of the two. So then fast forward to a more recent experience, actually, in my early days at Pure Health Exchange, we were actually doing programming. So we were doing or implementing our school-based health education program in inner city high schools in Washington, D.C., which is where I live. And one of the high schools actually had a school-based health center inside the high school. So a school-based health center is very different from a school nurse, right? Like they also had a school nurse and you can go to the school nurse if you're not feeling well during the school day, right? But no, this was an actual clinic, right? That was run and operated by a medical hospital in the area, and it provided free, 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 free medical care to students and their families, which is also, you're probably like, well, where are you going with this? This is awesome, right? Like this is the health equity dream. But guess what? None of the students knew it existed. And it was right there in their high school. So and I mean literally, Pratika, this particular high school, you had to go through metal detectors.
Oh.
So you walk through the metal detectors, and as soon as you exit on the right was this school-based health center that kids passed each and every day, but they had no idea that it even existed. They had no idea they never opened the door. Even some of the teachers didn't even know that it existed. The staff in the school-based health center, they are medical staff, and they didn't really interact with the school staff. So here it is, the health equity dream, right? Like this is literally a barrier removed, and yet no one knew about it. So that I would say is sort of that experience is my more recent experience that sort of tells me every day, like, yeah, we've made a lot of progress, but there are still some real salient challenges that we still have to overcome. And that one I would say is one that really sticks with me.
Yeah, I totally love what you said. And, you started off talking about like sometimes when we do come from these well-privileged, well-resourced communities, then, when you talked about your experiences with your research and your internship, you notice that a lot of people don't have access to these things that we consider basic necessities, groceries, medical. And so that kind of
Mm-hmm.
reveals the gap that still exists. And that's just because sometimes we don't visibly see these things in our communities, but when we go out and go to more places, that's when we really notice these pressing issues. And even right now, when you were talking earlier about your research, you started off like just doing some research like a college student, but then you really notice larger issues in community like food
That's right.
insecurity, right? And so I think that that's really inspirational because sometimes when you're going in to learn something else, you end up finding out even more like prevailing issues in society, right? And so that kind of became a catalyst and an inspiration for you to continue your psychology work. And then, as you talked about with the school-based health center and how that was like an eye-opener where there's these resources out there, but youth or young adults, we don't know how to take the best advantage of these resources. And so kind of increasing the receptiveness to these resources, but also breaking those barriers that may prevent us. Because obviously, as you talked about, there are barriers that do prevent youth, whether it be, your background or the community that you live in. It's very important to kind of be aware of all these things. So I think that, yeah, that's definitely a big inspiration of how you got
Hmm.
involved in health equity work. So kind of going like with that flow with when you're sharing your stories, do you have any memorable story to share with our listeners about a particular youth influenced positively by PhD? Of course, PhDs positively affected many youth, but just one story in particular that you think kind of stands out and really symbolizes the essence of this organization. And of course, this can be an anonymous youth.
Oh, sure. I am this question really warms my heart and really gets me excited because it just speaks to the power of young people and what their voices can do and just how they can really shape the world. And over the years, I would say we started to go back to our founding roots. For those of you who are not familiar with Peer Health Exchange, it is a national nonprofit that was started 21 years ago by a young person who was my predecessor, the founding CEO of Peer Health Exchange. She was just right out of college, and she took direction from high school students who said, look, we need health education. Like, yeah, academic tutoring is great, but no one's teaching us about health. And so she took that charge very seriously. And then now, 21 years later, we are still doing that work. So they're definitely an inspiration. Those group of young people founding and sort of their legacy of founding
Yeah.
this is definitely a story. But I would say more recently, maybe like 4 years ago, in the pandemic, we could not do our school-based work because schools, like everything else, was shut down, and we literally had to stop everything. And it was a time where young people actually needed us the most, but we could not physically get to them in classrooms. And so we knew we had to do something different. We knew that we had to reach young people through digital ways. And so we worked with a group, the inaugural Youth Advisory Board, and Pratika is a part of our Youth Advisory Board today. So you're definitely a success story in and of itself. But that inaugural group of young people from California, they were the ones that created Self-C. And they were the ones that told us what it needed to look like, what it needed to be, what it needed to focus on, which was mental health at the time and also sexual health. So they were a group of leaders that really sort of inspire what you see today on selfc.org. But one in particular I want to highlight, I'm not going to give names because I did not get her permission to share her
Mhm.
story, but I happened to get to work with her very closely on a couple of things, and we still keep in contact. But she was a young person that worked with us on Self-C. Um, her high school didn't have Peer Health Exchange. And her introduction to us was through this digital work that we were embarking on. She had no idea that we were doing school-based work. So when she found out that we were doing school-based work, she and another one of her classmates that were a part of this youth advisory board went to their high school principal and said, look, I'm working with this organization on this digital thing, but actually they teach health education and we don't have that at our school.
Mhm.
How can we get it? So that just advocacy of that young person was just inspiring and amazing. Like I wouldn't have had at her age, I think she probably was like 16 at the time. I definitely wouldn't have had the confidence to think or even think that I had enough power to make a change like that in my high school. And the principal was receptive and said, sure. And we are partnering to this day with that high school because of that young person's voice.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's just like one highlight that just sticks with me about just the
Yeah.
power of like advocacy. And this young person has gone on, has decided, is in college now, probably getting close to finishing, which is so hard to believe, but decided to major in public health, right? So had no idea about, this major in this area of education. And because of her Peer Health Exchange experience, decided like this is what she wants to pursue and study, and has done work with Planned Parenthood in the area where her college is located, has continued to advocate, decided to work in reproductive health and fighting for reproductive rights. So that to me, again, is just a powerful story that just stays with me, and how peer health exchange has influenced this young person, but more importantly, how this young person has influenced peer health exchange and is influencing health outside of peer health exchange. So that's the story that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, that's great. And that kind of really emphasizes the point of like PHE is really instilling youth advocacy, this kind of encouragement in youth that we matter, our voices matter. And it
Yes,
just takes one voice, right? As you said, like student just had to ask her principal, and had she not done that, you would have never known that that school would be receptive to this policy and, really brought in health education into the school. And
yes,
I'm sure that affected the entire student body in a very positive manner, right? So I think that that's the when it comes to health equity advocacy, like it's just kind of
hmm,
like a domino effect when we're just one, it takes one youth to kind of start it, and then we're all working together to kind of move
that's
towards
right.
this common goal, right? Yeah. And
That's
I think,
right.
yeah, I agree. And I think that that's very important too, because sometimes with advocacy, youth can be like scared, like it's a little daunting. Like, how can we really just take the problem out by the root and bring such massive change at a national level? But it really just, your example just showed how it comes in small steps, right? Like you can start at your school level, and then from there it can maybe expand to your district and nearby district. And so it just really takes that to really bring change at a larger, like macro level, but you have to start like at a micro level somewhere. So
That's right.
yeah. And so kind of really when it comes to the future of health equity. Dr. Glymph, what do you think we're still missing when it comes to achieving health equity? I know we touched on it a little bit, just some key points that you think are missing, and what steps do you think are important to be taken, whether it comes to youth advocacy or just in general, what can our listeners use?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And, I think about this a lot. I mean, definitely amplifying youth voice
Mhm.
for me feels like the solution. um,
Yeah.
and and I say that because as a person I'm always about learning and learning new things. But also, I've started to get into history a little bit, which is interesting because history was not my favorite subject
Mhm.
in school. But I do think that there are a lot of lessons from that we can
Yeah.
take to inspire us if we just kind of go back in history. And the reason why I'm saying that in response to your question is because at the when I think about really pivotal and significant movements in this country, young people. It was young people. It was
Yeah.
young people really organizing, or exerting their voice, um, putting their lives on the line, to be honest. But it was always like these pivotal movements that I sort of want to revisit and gravitate to. That's what it was. That's who was at the heart of that. And so for me, it's like, yeah, it really is young people that have the power to make change. But also, I started to think about, well, who are the adults that were lifting them up, right? Like, what did it look like to
Yeah.
really amplify their voices? So for me, when you ask me like how are we going to move the needle on health equity, I think it is finding going back to our roots and finding ways to continue to uplift and amplify young people.
Yeah.
I think, and because I think as adults, and I'm a parent of a young person, so I'm kind of speaking not only from the work that I do with at Pure Health Exchange, but also as a mom and also as a middle-aged woman who at some point I want to retire, and I'm always thinking about, well, what legacy do I want to leave, or what do I want the world to look like, or what state do I want the world to be in when I do stop working, right?
Yeah.
I'm relying on you all. Like so I have to invest in you all. And I think it really is going to be about now what I can do is use my power and use
Mhm.
my influence as an adult to make space for your voices to be uplifted and to be heard. And I have to be comfortable with sometimes I need to fall back. And sometimes it's not, it's like, you hear make seats at the table. I also have to be comfortable with knowing like it's not my table. Like I'm not a young person. Like maybe I can provide the table and then I step away because it's
Hmm.
not even my table to be sitting at.
Yeah.
My job is just to make sure it's there, that you have one. And so I think that's what we need. We need to listen more as adults. We need to be okay with we don't have all the answers. We have to sort of address adultism in that way. Adultism
Hmm.
is about just because you're older, you know more. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. And I think this pandemic challenged that belief even for me because I had to realize like I have never been a young person that attended school in a global pandemic. I have zero experience and zero expertise. So therefore, I'm not expert. I know nothing. And the only experts are the young people who've had that experience. So in order for me to know in my job, how to best help you, I had to say that to myself. I am not the expert here. Talk to the experts. What you get to do is find the resources and make sure that young people get what they need. But whatever they say they need, that's the truth. And you listen. And
Yeah.
I think that is what is going to be needed to redress health equity because there's so many issues in health that are impacting you all just because, the world has changed so much. I went to school for Tika and there was no internet. Okay. Like I remember in my lifetime going from no internet to dial up to like what we have now. There was no social media. So when I was your age, that was not a thing.
Hmm.
It did not exist. But yet we know like all of that is impacting you all. It's either creating access to resources, but it's also can create some harm. So I have limited experiences with that. So that's what I'm saying. Adults have to really realize that because the world has changed so much, there are just experiences that we have zero expertise.
Hmm.
And so we have to be okay with that. And we have to listen to the people who do. And that's you all. So that's what I think is going to make a difference in the future.
Yeah, I think that that's very powerful as well because I think that understanding that youth voices, like everyone brings a different perspective to the table, right? Adults, they have their perspective with they've done research, they've done work in this field, and youth bring their own perspective, right? Everyone's kind of
Right,
coming at different angles, and everyone has something different that they offer to the table. Youth have their own experiences, their own stories to share, which they've been through, as you said, like we're I think Gen Z was like the first generation, like with technology as soon as they were born, right? So like that's a
right,
completely different experience than different generations. And now Gen Alpha, I'm sure, has an even more different experience than we did, right? So I think like really just being receptive of that, those different perspectives because everyone has something valuable that
that's
they
right,
bring. And if we kind of balance together all these perspectives, put them all into account, then I think that is where real change is going to come from because then we're really kind of balancing all the different perspectives that are equally valid. They're all coming from different places. Parents have their own perspective, teachers,
right,
educators, kids and youth even, right? So I think that's why there's been that increasing acceptance of youth voices and now we're involved in those spaces and we participate in those spaces which we weren't conventionally, participating in.
right,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. So I love that. And so finally, to wrap things up, Dr. Glymph, what is one message that you would like to leave our listeners with today as they move on with their days?
I would say so. We just wrapped up Mental Health Awareness Month, and we're now in Pride Month. And so this is like a time of year where I do a lot of reflection on wellness, and a lot of reflection just on wellness and just on like just my values around equality and equity. And so I will leave you with this. Um, be well and taking care of yourself is an act of resistance and is an act of justice. And so that's sort of how I merge these 2 months. It's like I have the power and I have the will to just know that I will be okay and to just really pour into taking care of myself. And it could just be like little small things. So like finding that one thing that just brings you joy is what I'm holding on to on the heels of Mental Health Awareness Month. And then as we are looking into Pride Month, and then Juneteenth is coming up, and these are definitely a lot of history around resistance and fights for equal rights. Like finding joy and healing and taking care of yourself is the most powerful act of resistance that you can do. So that's what I'm going to leave your listeners with.
Yeah, I love it. Self-care is very important. You know, what you find joy in. You only have one life, so you might as well like live it to the fullest, right? So yeah, that wraps up today's fabulous session with Dr. Angela Glymph from Pure Health
Awesome.
Exchange. Your wisdom is so inspirational, doctor, and very
Thank you,
important
Patika.
in today's time. It's so important for us because we as youth need people and organizations like PHE who are championing health equity, who care about us and who really see us as valuable assets to the table, right? So we're so
Absolutely.
grateful. Yeah, thank you so much. We're so grateful for you giving your time to us. And for our listeners, have a great rest of your day. Don't forget to subscribe to Talk It Out with Pratika Karkwal for more content like this. And please feel free to share your topic requests, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Dr. Glymph.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye.